Welcome everyone to today's Book Sandwiched In, a very special one with our Marilynne Robinson sampler. My name is Jennifer Greb and I am the System-Wide Services Director of the Tulsa City-County Library. First off, I would like to say thank you to the Friends of the Tulsa City-County Libraries for sponsoring today's program. If you'd like more information about becoming a friend of the library, or dare I say, perhaps gifting a membership to the Friends of the Library at this time of year, please visit tulsalibrary.org/friends. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Rebecca Howard. Rebecca is the managing librarian at the Martin Regional Library and the regional manager for the 6 East Region branches of the Tulsa City-County Library. She facilitates book discussions at the Martin Library and at Magic City Books and writes a monthly article for Public Radio Tulsa about books and reading. She lives with her spouse of 21 years and a 70-pound lapdog named Bo. Rebecca, welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I am really excited to be here today virtually and to talk to you all about Marilynne Robinson. What a great privilege and honor it is to be able to share with you some of her amazing work. We're going to scratch the surface of her work. I was telling Jennifer earlier, I feel like I need a college course to encompass all of the wonderful things that she's doing in her writing. I am going to share my screen really quickly here. Okay, this will just keep me on track because I can talk about her for a long time. So Marilynne Robinson was the 2020 Peggy V. Helmerich Distinguished Author Award winner, and so grateful that she was willing to postpone her visit until it was a little safer for everyone. So she will actually be here this year, 2021, to share with us just a little bit about her life, her journey, and her amazing work. And there will be a public presentation with her on Saturday, this Saturday at 10:30 at Central Library. And so if this piques your interest, please take this wonderful opportunity to be able to meet really one of the great authors of our time at the library. So I'm going to go ahead and start my slideshow here. By way of introduction, I'd like to read part of the citation that Marilynne Robinson received in 2012 when she was awarded the National Humanities Medal. She received that, like I said, in 2012 for, quote, grace and intelligence in writing. That is a great summary of her work. The citation reads in part, Marilynne Robinson's career represents a remarkable merger of the interests of the public intellectual and the private citizen. In her gem-like novels, she has used modest heartland settings to unearth universal themes of family and spirit in time, becoming one of the most admired practitioners of literary fiction in the United States. In addition to the National Humanities Medal, she is the recipient of the 2016 Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction, and she has received numerous awards, which I'll mention as we go through some of her novels, including the Pulitzer for her novel Gillian. Robinson began teaching at the esteemed Iowa Writers Workshop in 1991 and taught there until her retirement in the spring of 2016. So a little bit about her early life. She was born November 26th, 1943 in the panhandle of northern Idaho. So she just had a birthday. Her father, John Summers, harvested timber for lumber companies. And so the family moved among towns between the border of Idaho and Washington. But primarily she grew up in Coolin, Idaho, which this is a picture of Coolin that I found in the digital archives of the University of Idaho. And this is from 1943. I wanted to find something from the year that she was born. And if you take a look at it, and if you've read Housekeeping, doesn't this just encapsulate that novel? cold forest, lake water. So this was very, I think her environment definitely influenced her as a writer. And this area was like the setting in Housekeeping, surrounded by really large lakes, picturesque, beautiful. And those lakes were crossed by the long railroad bridges that figure so prominently in Housekeeping. Marilynne Robinson's family was Presbyterian. That's a fact that's going to be very relevant to her work as well. She studied American literature and took several courses on religion at Brown University, and she attended graduate school at the University of Washington. She received her doctorate in 1977. So I want to talk a little bit about the religious framework. This is a quote from Marilynne Robinson herself, who said that religion for her is a framing mechanism. It is a language of orientation that presents itself as a series of questions. It talks about the arc of life and the quality of experience in ways that I've found fruitful to think about. So as I mentioned, she grew up Presbyterian. She later became a Congregationalist. That should ring a bell with the two characters in Gillian. And she occasionally preaches at her church. Her religion is rooted in the here and now. She is very focused on the human experience on earth. Injustice, equality, intellect, learning, science all plays a part in her worldview. And in a 2008 Paris Review article, which I found to be really eye-opening about her craft, when asked if she considered herself a religious writer, she responds, "As soon as religion draws a line around itself, it becomes falsified. Anything that is written compassionately and perceptively probably satisfies every definition of religious, whether a writer intends it to be or not." And I want to mention religion because while it is absolutely not necessary to have a religious background to appreciate Robinson, I think it absolutely enriches your experience of reading Robinson if you have some knowledge of the Bible, even as literature. The stories, the themes, the vocabulary, they're all sort of repeated in her novels and in a way that really enriches your experience of the story. So let's get to her work. She is the author of 10 books, beginning with Housekeeping in 1980. Housekeeping was her debut novel. It was the winner of the PEN/Hemingway Award for debut fiction. Next up for her was Mother Country, Britain, the Welfare State, and Nuclear Pollution from 1989. This was a National Book Award finalist for nonfiction. She actually wrote this while she was on sabbatical in England. Next is The Death of Adam, 1998, Essays on Modern Thought. And then Gilead came next in November of 2004. So notice it was 24 years later after her first novel that she came out with, her second novel, Gilead. It won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction. I think it is probably the novel that most people who are aware of Marilynne Robinson came to first, and certainly gained her a lot of great readers and a lot of critical acclaim as well. In 2008, we have Home, which won the Women's Prize for Fiction. And then When I Was a Child, I Read Books is from 2012. Those are essays, it's nonfiction again. Lila, 2014, won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction and was longlisted for the National Book Award and the Man Booker Prize. The Givenness of Things and What Are We Doing Here are both collections of essays from 2015 and 2018, respectively. And then finally, Jack in 2020, which was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction that's administered by the American Library Association. So for my purposes, so that this doesn't go for 2 hours, I am focusing on her fiction, on her novels. And so just a quick word about general style, tone, her focus, and then appeal. Her style has sort of a timeless quality. Her prose reads in sort of an almost old-fashioned way. It takes a little bit of time to get into, but so rewarding once you do. It feels very heavily influenced by the 19th century, which she studied in college, 19th century American literature. Her language is very metaphorical, it's lyrical, but it's also precise. If you look at her novels, they are not long. I don't believe any are over 300 pages. I'm looking at them right now on my table, and very precise language. Her tone is introspective, quiet, reflective, spiritual. The focus is character 100%. I've got a quote here written by her about all of her novels involve a character that she wants to know better. Novelist is a database we have at the library that gives you information about read-alikes and appeal factors. And novelist says about Marilynne Robinson, her style is thoughtfully paced, character-driven, that focuses on relationships among people, their connections to places and the holy, examining the mysteries of human moral imperfection in elegant prose. She deals with issues like abandonment, family turmoil, spiritual questioning, and the divine within the ordinary. Her first novel, which I'll try not to gush about too much, Housekeeping, is one of my all-time favorite novels. It was published in 1980, as I mentioned, and I wanted to share a little bit about the origin of housekeeping because it's so interesting. So this was also from her Paris Review interview that I mentioned earlier. When I went to college, these are her words. When I went to college, I majored in American literature, which was unusual then, but it meant that I was broadly exposed to 19th century American literature. I became interested in the way that American writers used metaphoric language, starting with Emerson. When I entered the PhD program, I started writing these metaphors down just to get the feeling of writing in that voice. After I finished my dissertation, I read through the stack of metaphors and they cohered in a way that I hadn't expected. I could see that I had created something that implied much more. So I started writing Housekeeping, and the characters became important for me. I told a friend of mine, a writer named John Clayton, that I had begun working on this thing, and he asked to see it. The next thing I knew, I got a letter from his agent saying that she would be happy to represent it. So this thing turned out to be a Pulitzer Prize finalist and a Penn Hemingway Award winner, but really was surprising in the reception that it got. And it was really largely driven by a glowing New York Times review written by Anatole Broyard, which appeared January 7th, 1981. In part, he wrote, "Here's a first novel that sounds as if the author has been treasuring it up all her life, waiting for it to form itself." And then I'll skip down a little bit. "You can feel in the book a gathering, voluptuous release of confidence, a delighted surprise at the unexpected capacities of language, a close, careful fondness for people that we thought only saints felt." So not too bad for a little jotting down as part of her PhD program. The Housekeeping, which I have a copy of here, opens with a simple declarative line, "My name is Ruth." And of course, Ruth brings to mind Ruth of the Old Testament. And it also starts with a bit of a lineage. So I'd like to read just a little bit of the first page of Housekeeping. "My name is Ruth. I grew up with my younger sister, Lucille, under the care of my grandmother, Mrs. Sylvia Foster, and when she died, of her sister-in-laws, Mrs. Lily and Nona Foster, and when they fled, of her daughter, Mrs. Sylvia Fisher. Through all these generations of elders, we lived in one house, my grandmother's house, built for her by her husband, Edmund Foster, an employee of the railroad who escaped this world years before I entered it. So even in that first page, you can hear how the writing's a little bit different. It is reflective of almost the begats from Genesis. Ruth is giving you her lineage, and that's going to be really important because we come to understand that her family is, it's a lineage she cannot escape, and that shapes the way she interacts with the world. So this is a story told from Ruth's perspective as an adult. So she's an adult looking back on the coming of age alongside her sister Lucille. The two are orphaned at a young age through very tragic circumstances. Their mother, Helen, drops them off at their grandmother's, whom they've never been to, drops them off on the porch, tells them to wait, and then subsequently drives her car into Fingerbone Lake, which of course has a history in her family as well. The two girls are they pass through several caregivers, and they're finally placed in the care of their unconventional and unpredictable aunt, Sylvie. So Sylvie, a great character, is transient, and she really prefers sleeping outdoors. Her housekeeping is haphazard and very inconsistent. In fact, so much so that Ruthie's sister Lucille chooses to take up residence with one of her teachers eventually, rather than live with Sylvie. She separates from Sylvie, whereas Ruthie really starts to identify with Sylvie, much like in the book of Ruth in the Bible. Ruth stays with Sylvie. She clings to her, and they form a bond, and we see Lucille in the opposite. So it's really, Lucille offers a counterpoint to Sylvie's sort of recklessness is not really the word, but her lack of concern for what society thinks, for rules, for order, for etiquette, for manners. Lucille's very concerned with those things, and Ruthie really identifies more with Sylvie. One critic writes, housekeeping in the novel is a metaphor for the futility of human efforts to deny the disruptive power of nature and the uncertainty of human experience. And I think one of the most beautiful passages in this book, and in any book, honestly, is a reflection about how sorrow and loss are tangled up with joy in life. And Ruthie is reflecting on that later, of course, as an adult. I cannot taste a cup of water, but I recall that the eye of the lake is my grandfather's, and that the lake's heavy, blind, encumbering waters composed my mother's limbs, and weighed her garments, and stopped her breath, and stopped her sight. There is remembrance and communion, altogether human and unhallowed, for families will not be broken. Curse and expel them, send their children wandering, drown them in floods and fires, and old women will make songs out of all these sorrows, and sit in the porches and sing them on mild evenings. Every sorrow suggests 1,000 songs, and every song recalls 1,000 sorrows, and so they are infinite in number and all the same. That is Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. Again, that's her first novel. And then 24 years later, we get Gillian. Here's a new version of that cover. Gillian is a story told through a series of letters that are penned by the Reverend John Ames. He's a Congregationalist minister, and he's writing letters to his young son. At 76, Ames, his heart is failing, and he is attempting to compile as much family history and fatherly wisdom that he can impart for a son whom he will not live to see grow up. Ames is looking at the world as though for the first time, He is focused on the immediate. He says, this is an interesting planet. It deserves all the attention you can give it. Gilead is very much about appreciation for existence and our human experience. Ames has borne the loss of his first wife at a very young age and their newborn daughter, and has found a certain contentment to his solitude. He takes comfort in a routine that involves reading and studying. As he says, a pot of coffee, a fried egg sandwich, baseball on the radio. But then one rainy Sunday, some 40 years of living as a single person in his town, a young, ragged-looking woman slips into the sanctuary to avoid a downpour, and Ames experiences the unexpected, a second chance at family. So from the book, I could have married again while I was young. A congregation likes to have a married minister. And I was introduced to every niece and sister-in-law in 100 miles. In retrospect, I'm very grateful for whatever reluctance it was that kept me alone until your mother came. Now that I look back, it seems to me that in all the deep darkness, a miracle was preparing. So I am right to remember it as a blessed time and myself as waiting in confidence, even if I had no ideas what I was waiting for. Like Abraham of the Old Testament, Ames has a son later in his life, once he had given up the hope of ever experiencing parenthood. Yet this miracle is not without its own sorrow too, because he will not live to see this son grow up. This book is Ames grappling with mortality, with his own shortcomings, his small worry about who will replace him in Lila, his wife Lila, and his son Bobby's life, fear that might be his godson Jack, and kind of a reconciliation that he has to come to with Jack, and also with his own mortality. So Ames is such a wonderful character. He's part mystic, part pagan, part Christian. He's part naturalist. He's entirely human, as are all the themes that Robinson addresses in Gilead. So she gives us Gilead, and we're left wondering about all those characters in that town. And thankfully, she comes back with Home, which comes out in 2008. So Home is the second book in what we call the Gilead novels. It occurs concurrently with Gilead, but with a different point of view. And, you know, again, biblical literacy, there are 4 gospels, there are 4 books of Gilead. They all share similar timelines, similar narratives, but they're told from slightly different perspectives and have a slightly different emphasis on what's important. So Home occurs and is told from the perspective of Reverend Robert Boughton. Now, this is the Presbyterian minister in Gilead, who is also the Reverend John Ames' best friend, longtime friend, and confidant. This is his story, along with 2 of his 8 children, Glory and Jack. And Glory is 38, and she has returned home to Gilead to care for her dying father. And soon thereafter, Jack, who's been gone for 20 years, a 20-year absence, he returns. He's in search of peace, in search of a place to land. They don't quite understand what's happening with him. There's a lot that's sort of left unspoken. And this is, you know, Jack is the favorite child. There's no denying this, there's no hiding this. Jack is the quintessential prodigal son. He's deeply loved and longed for because he's so hard to reach. And so this is really about Jack and his father, Robert, sort of coming to try to understand each other, sometimes unsuccessfully, and really struggling with both what is unspoken and what is spoken. And this is also an exploration about the burgeoning closeness between Glory and Jack. Both of them come to understand each other better and come to understand the role that home plays in their life and what meaning it has for both of them. So home really is expressing the joy and pain of familial bonds and the weight of secrets among those with whom we're closest. The push and pull of home in our efforts to find meaning. And just a quick quote from Home. This is from Glory's thinking about the Bible. Glory muses, what a strange old book it was. How oddly holiness situated itself among things of the world. It expresses the will of God to sustain us in this flesh, in this life, weary or bittered or bewildered as we may be. God is faithful. He lets us wander, so we'll know what it means to come home. And then our third book in the Gilead series is Lila. And Lila, of course, is speaking, it is referring to John Ames' much younger second wife. And Lila, this is an opportunity for us to hear her backstory. We always knew that there was a story from Gilead, but this is her opportunity to sort of have something told from her perspective. So Lila is a migrant drifter. Again, there's that emphasis and focus on the outcast, the transient. This is a story that recalls the conventional Dust Bowl narratives of the 30s. The book opens in 1920, though, when Lila is only 3, and she's stolen away from those who would just likely neglect her and allow her to die. She's stolen by a woman named Doll, and they walk through a heavy rain, again water, to a small cabin where an older woman who Doll knows begrudgingly lets them inside. The two of them begin to wash the girl in a basin in a scene reminiscent of Rembrandt. Again, we see water once again playing a central metaphor in Robinson's work. The washing away of sin, the baptism into new life. We see this in rain, in lakes, in actual baptism. So we know that John Ames baptizes Lila later after they meet and are beginning their courtship. Time passes for Lila after she's taken. Time passes, and most of it unpleasantly. She's someone who has endured a lot of trauma and who is living in extreme poverty. But one day she slips into a church just to get out of a downpour. And that's when the Reverend John Ames sees her. They are a very unusual pairing. He's twice her age. He's very well-educated, well-read, somewhat refined. Even though this is a small town, he's still a cerebral person. And Lila is a laborer. She's someone who feels more comfortable outside than she does inside. Ames recounts in Gilead that he falls in love instantly, but we see that Lila is much more hesitant. She's not at all certain that Ames will love her unconditionally or that he will be able to overlook her past. And so she's also not trusting in any attachment. So for Lila, the focus here is really on the question of healing and can she trust in the goodness that John Ames represents when she's experienced so much that is not good, when she's experienced so much of the world's darkness, including just the poverty that she's faced, the trauma that she's faced, and what does it take what does it take to bring Lila sort of into this community? Will she be able to do that? And I think that those themes continue then in Jack. Jack is, of course, the final. So this is my copy of Jack, and you can see it's got the little Oprah's book club on there, because all 4 of these novels were featured in that. They had conversations around all 4 novels. So it's quite interesting that Robinson has so much both critical as well as popular success. Jack is the most recent book, of course, from 2020. I love all these new covers as well, but and Jack is the prodigal son. Jack is the beloved son of Robert Boughton and the godson of John Ames. He causes them much distress, much pain, but he is always longed for. And this is his story. And so this finds Jack in St. Louis, post-World War II. By this time, he's really lost his youthful appearance, if not his charm. And he is an alcoholic. He struggles to find work and to keep work. He sleeps rough most nights. But he meets and falls in love with Della Miles. And Della Miles is a high school teacher and the daughter of a respected minister. She is Black, and this is during the height of Jim Crow. The first quarter of this book takes place entirely, one night when the 2 are locked inside a whites only cemetery. And it's just conversation between the 2 of them about their thoughts about literature and family and spirituality, existence. They're having conversations. It's a very slow, thoughtful, deliberate, character-driven book. Aside from the societal and familial impediments to their relationship, though, Jack is really his own worst enemy. In the same way that Lila resists attachment, Jack resists attachment because he feels himself to be defective in some way. He refers to himself as the Prince of Darkness. He has decided at the point when this book begins that the only thing he wants in his life is to be harmless. But he knows that in order to do no harm, to be harmless, he's got to be alone. And so I think Robinson's so-called transients are among her most compelling characters. Jack, Lila, Sylvie. What do we do with individuals I think we all know and love, who we long for and we really want to reach, but for whatever reason, they're not going to conform? And how do we allow ourselves to just exist and let them exist side by side and love them? What does that unconditional love look like? So that is such a very, very brief scratching of the surface with Marilynne Robinson. I know that our program ends at 12:50, and so I wanted to allow for a little bit of time if there were questions or comments that you all had. Again, I encourage everyone to attend the public presentation with Marilynne Robinson on Saturday at Central Library. It will be on the lower level in Bredington. Again, this is just a tremendous opportunity to hear one of the great thinkers, scholars, and of course, authors of our time. So with that, I will see if there are any questions, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Rebecca, thank you. That was just beautiful. Your review of those books even just really brings through Marilynne Robinson's just amazing depth, I think, and I loved how you helped us tie things together there. Do we have any questions that have come in or anything for the chat? I don't see anything yet. Rebecca, I will ask, did you have a favorite? I know you've talked about just how prolific Marilynne Robinson is.
Yeah, so Housekeeping is probably among the top 10 books of my life. I love Housekeeping. I get something new out of it every time I read it. This last time I read it, it hadn't dawned on me to compare it to the book of Ruth from the Bible. And so as I was reading, I was like, yeah, that's what she's doing. So I think, and it's also just a scant, like 220 pages. But it's just it's so rich and so full. But so I loved Housekeeping, but for totally different reasons. I love Gilead. I love the thought of this minister, like reflecting back on his life and also trying to impart some of that to his son, knowing that he's not going to be around to see him. They're all amazing in their own ways, but I just have a really special affinity for Housekeeping. I think it's really, really great.
Well, I loved that you brought in the tie-in to the book of Ruth, because when you said that, I was, well, obviously, yes. And I don't know that, once you hear it, it seems so obvious, but when we get to hear and listen to Marilynne Robinson in person this weekend, just having that idea in our background, I think will really add a lot. We do have a question here. If there were another story for her to tell from Gilead, whose story do you think it would be? Who would you like to know more about?
Well, I'd love to know more about Glory from Home. I think Glory is Glory's the good daughter who comes home, but she's got some heartbreak in her life too. And so I think she would be an obvious choice. I also really want to know more about Della Miles. We don't really get a lot of her because it's Jack, so maybe the next book called Della would be really interesting, although that would blow my gospel theory out. Right. Like there's 4 Gilead books and there's 4 gospels, but I'd love to hear more about Della as well.
She has to stop there. She can't give
She can do more.
Do we have any other questions? Rebecca, I know you mentioned when we were talking at the beginning that you really had to focus, because she has offered so much, penned so much. You really had to focus on the fiction. Couldn't fit in nonfiction as well. Just as a teaser for those, is there any recommendation you would throw out if somebody were to start with her nonfiction?
When I was a child, I read books would be a really great one to read. I think it talks a lot about the role that reading, stories, literature, including the Bible, had on her as an artist, as a writer. And so I think I'd suggest that one first. Maybe Mother Country, if you're interested in environmental justice. Wow. That was something like, again, this was like something completely different, but very interesting about the Sellafield nuclear plant in Britain. And yeah, I think either one of those for different reasons would be great to read.
So a couple little tidbits there for our nonfiction readers out there. I'll give it just a second see if any other questions come in. I do want to take this opportunity again to say thank you to the Friends of the Tulsa City-County Libraries for continually hosting Book Sandwiched In. That gives us so much to think about. I don't see any other questions. So Rebecca, I want to say thank you so much for providing this sampler for us. We can really tell the love that you put into reading her books, and you've really helped us all look forward to Marilynne Robinson so much more, I think. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you. It was absolutely my pleasure. Thanks so much.